Hello everybody, I welcome you all to the second and final part of the Garfield Iceberg. Before moving on, I'd like to address an error in the previous video. Thanks to Lucas Drakehill for correcting me. So got an entry wrong. Garfield doesn't talk is referring to the fact that he doesn't talk. Garfield only thinks, he doesn't have a speech bubble, only thought bubbles. Silent Garfield is just how crazy John actually is, because that is what he sees/hears. And with that correction out of the way, let's get into the video. Official Garfield minus Garfield comic. As previously said, Garfield minus Garfield is a webcomic by Dan Walsh, where each strip of Garfield minus Garfield is an edit of a comic strip from the comic Garfield, removing all characters except Garfield's owner, John Arbuckle. Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield, approved of the project, and an official Garfield book, also called Garfield minus Garfield, was published by his company. It was mainly edited comics by Walsh, with some comics contributed by Davis. Garfield minus Garfield is also the name of a strip published by Paws Inc., Jim Davis's company, using the same premise which started in late 2008 and ended in 2020. Remastered Garfield and Friends intro. So there exists a remaster of the intro to the 1988 animated television series Garfield and Friends. So yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say. Moving on. A human in a catsuit. This entry refers to an article from the newsletter Entertainment Weekly, where during an interview with Jim Davis, the question, "I read on the official Garfield website that you grew up on a farm with 25 cats. Is that true? Did any of the cats influence Garfield?" is asked to Jim Davis, and he answers with, "That's true, we had 120 acres and it was always a good idea to have lots of cats because most cats are mouse hunters, as opposed to Garfield. I pulled Garfield a little bit from several cats I knew, but more from the fat house cats that lived with my grandparents and friends. Cats who had their own chair. It was the indoor cats that most influenced him. He was also influenced by a lot of people. Basically, Garfield is a human in a cat suit.
He said it! He said it!
He exists in a cat's body and moves like a cat and does many cat-like things, but really, his basic personality is hopefully a lot like we all are, way deep down with just our basic animal urges. SCP-3166. SCP-3166, also labeled as "You Have No Idea How Alone You Are," Garfield is an antagonist in the SCP Foundation series. This monster manifests only when Garfield's franchise is doing poorly and takes the appearance of a disturbing and monstrous version of the well-known fictional character, Garfield. To keep SCP-3166 away, the SCP Foundation assists the franchise with funding whenever it can, even to the point of using mimetic agents in the comics. A Week of Garfield. A Week of Garfield, or as it's known in Japan, Gafirundo no Ishu Hakan, is a 1989 Famicom title starring Garfield. It was released exclusively in Japan. A late prototype surfaced online on March 16, 2019. The game is a side-scrolling platformer with 9 levels that represent each day of the week, with Saturday and Sunday both being split into 2 levels representing the morning and afternoon. Each level contains power-ups that can be found by walking over them, such as increasing Garfield's speed or giving him weapons and ammo. Garfield can fight enemies using 4 weapons: kicks, a bone that flies straight forward, a pie that splits into 4 projectiles, and cornflakes with raisin, which fires 3 projectiles in 3 directions. If a weapon's ammo runs out, Garfield will not be able to use it until he acquires more. The only attack that does not require ammo is the kick. Levels are divided into multiple segments, and Garfield must find the key at the end of each level segment. Later in the game, the keys will be guarded by an alleyway cat who attacks Garfield. Each level has a time limit. When a level is completed, John will say something and the next level will start. Bootleg Garfield media. Another quite literal entry. There's a huge variety of Garfield bootleg media. We have bootleg Garfield plushes, bootleg Garfield shirt, bootleg Garfield bouncy castle, and bootleg Garfield camera, just to name a few. Or, as a wise man once said, we're just at the tip of the iceberg. Prototype Garfield. Before Garfield was a mainstream media gargantuan, at the early beginnings, Jim Davis had published various Prototype Garfield comics weekly in the Pendleton, Indiana newspaper, the Pendleton Times. These comics were interestingly titled John. John centers around the titular character John, along with his plain, stripeless cat, Garfield. Lyman, the character who eventually infamously disappears with no explanation in Garfield, also had an appearance here along with his dog, Spot. Spot is the original version of Odie in this comic strip. It's unknown why this name was changed, but the likely reason is that Spot is a very stereotypical name for a dog, which is made fun of in one of the comics. This name change also resulted in Davis having to alter the punchline of one of the comics so that it would still work when remade in Garfield. Most comics in the series would eventually get slightly altered and re-released as mainstream Garfield comics when they came out. However, there were a few unique comics which never got adapted into Garfield. Spot the Dragon. Spot the Dragon is a fire-breathing dragon and the pet of Vivacia. Spot's face isn't shown during the episode. Physically, he has a tan green belly and swampy green scales. From his back downwards to his tail, he has large protruding spikes, and on the tail itself, red stripes around the girth. The tip of the tail is shaped like an arrow. His legs have darkened scales that extend in layers on multiple spots and hairs just above his knees. He is shown to be gullible. This is shown when Garfield tricks him into believing a fire extinguisher is a breath freshener. He has a total of 2 appearances, appearing in Garfield and Friends, Season 7 episode The Horror Hostess Part 1 and The Horror Hostess Part 2. Boogaboo, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Boogaboo, I don't know what I'm supposed to say is an unused text dialogue from the game Garfield's Fun Fest, which is a 2008 platformer game for the Nintendo DS. It is based on the direct-to-video Garfield movie of the same name. It is unknown which character when this dialogue text would read out. Cold War / dark humor. This is a very wacky and weird entry, probably the strangest entry yet. So on the Steam page of the 2013 Garfield cart, during an unspecified amount of time, the tags which would help categorize the game were Cold War and dark humor. We can say this happened sometime around the 17th of October 2017. I say this exact date because on that precise date a thread was created questioning why the game had such unusual tags. And the first reply is just truly creepy. Well, if you look at Garfield's 9 Lives animated version claims his 7th life is, then this would mean that this game takes place as the US military unfairly tests Garfield, also known as 19GB. His 7th life took place in some time of the 1950s, so Cold War is a check. The abuse Garfield went through was dark and lots of people find this game funny, so dark humor is another check. Often all lab tests on animals include psychedelic drugs, so I guess psychedelic is a check too. June 1st, 2018, or January 6th, 2018 if you're American. This entry refers to a supposed transmission which played on Cartoon Network at 2 AM during an unknown date, in mostly Latin American countries. So it starts right after a Nerf advertisement where the screen fades to black and it displays the number 1/6/18, which most likely refers to the date of Friday the 1st of June, 2018. And while the date is on display in intervals of 6 to 1 second, Garfield like images flash on the screen while audio from the eerie Garfield Macabro advertisement play, which was an advertisement for the upcoming Garfield and Friends show airing in Latin America. The total duration of the transmission is of about 30 seconds, and after it ended it simply fades to black and continues displaying whatever was in Cartoon Network at that time. As it can probably be assumed, it seems rather fake due to the fact that the only report of this happening is by the person who uploaded the original video of handcam footage recording a TV screen at supposedly 2 AM. Hell, even another YouTuber known as Mr. Retro made fun of the original video by showing how easy it is to fake it and made one of his own fake transmissions. "Isn't that your phone?" is a piece of dialogue said in the November 5th, 2018 comic strip where initially the bzzz sound is thought to come from John's phone, which he says is set to vibrate and is located in his back pocket. But later, Garfield says that his phone is right beside him on the table. This panel is followed by John running off in pain, with Garfield telling him smugly, "Aren't you going to answer your bee?" This comic at face value is just like most other Garfield comic strips, but some people, Redditors, thought that there was a bit more to it and that the bzzz sound effect wasn't coming from a bee but instead from a vibrator located in his ass. Charles Schultz drew Garfield on 2 legs. Davies' initial drawings of Garfield made him look like a morbidly obese feline than a merely chubby cat we know and love. His creator wanted to make him more endearing while retaining some of the personality features that earned him so many readers. 3 years after Davies created the strip and started syndicating it, he drew the strip at a Hollywood studio shared by animator Bill Melendez, who worked with Peanuts creator Charles M. Schultz on animated films such as A Charlie Brown Christmas. One day, Schultz found Davies trying to draw Garfield and suggested he draw the cat with bigger feet to make him stand on 2 feet. Thus, the Garfield we know today was born. Garfield did 9/11. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever supporting this supposed theory. There's quite literally not a single result resulted to googling Garfield did 9/11 or Garfield did 9/11 theory, which has most likely gotten me on a few watch lists and no-fly lists. The only interesting result I've gotten out of this is a post coming from the subreddit r/196 that states, "Fun fact, the Garfield comic that came out on 9/11 features femboy Garfield. Very nice to know." John 3:16. This is another meme mixing Garfield media with an outer substance. This time it's the verse John 3:16 from the Bible, which phonetically is identical to the pronunciation of our own John Arbuckle. The verse is usually paired with an image of a man dressed as Garfield holding a sign saying John 3:16, and usually the verse itself is posted under the picture, which reads, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Missing screaming with Binky segments. When Garfield and Friends was released on DVD in the mid-2000s, not only did they replace the original US Acres title card, but for unknown reasons, the prints used omit 4 screaming with Binky segments. One about baseball, one about the mountains, one about ballerina, and one about a pizza parlor. They're even harder to find in the US Acre title cards, since these 4 shorts did not appear in syndication. Garfield Birthday Comic Zodiac. Garfield Birthday Comic Zodiac refers to a social game in which people post a Garfield comic strip that was published on the day they were born. On February 18th, 2019, Twitter user @EllieClat tweeted, "I don't care about your zodiac sign, show me the Garfield strip from your birthday." Following this post, they shared the comic strip that was published the day they were born. The following month, on March 21st, Twitter user @ButteredBeagle shared a variant of the challenge. They wrote, "Fuck your zodiac sign, what Garfield comic was posted on your birthday?" In April, another person shared an autonomous Garfield comic challenge. On April 13th, Twitter user @Craps428 tweeted, "Forget your zodiac sign, what Garfield comic came out when you were born?" On August 29th, 2019, Twitter user @CatCracklash/ tweeted, "Fuck your zodiac sign, what's a Garfield comic that was published on the day you were born? Here's mine." This tweet became the first one to receive significant spread, garnering more than 7,500 likes and 1,100 retweets in less than 1 week. Garfield's dad. Little is currently known about Garfield's father. He was featured in a few pieces of merchandise, and in the upcoming 2024 Garfield movie, Garfield's father is named Vic and voiced by Samuel L. Jackson. Wild Tangent. The only valuable info I could find for this entry is that on the game service website Wild Tangent, you can play a list of obscure Garfield games like Garfield Solitaire, Garfield Kart, and Garfield Mahjong. 345 The Garfield Conspiracy. This strip's author's notes parody many conspiracy theories by presenting cherry-picked evidence that the seeds of Square Root of Minus Garfield were planted by the comic irregulars themselves 20 to 30 years before Square Root of Minus Garfield came along. If you don't know who the comic irregulars are, relax, I don't either, it's just too much of a weird rabbit hole to get into. The comic strip singles out 3 panels. One in which Odie has having been kicked by Garfield in the previous panel, falls on a banana, squirting the fruit out of its skin and into his mouth. The SQ and RT have been circled in red by the author and bolded in the transcript. One in which a hot dog, having been greased by Garfield prior to the first panel, squirts it out of the bun and is caught by Garfield. Again, the SQ and RT have been circled in red by the author and bolded in the transcript. And finally, one in which Garfield, having attempted to get up, finds he's taken root. Though not called out, the root part is clearly the focus here. SQRT is a common function name in computer programming, which tells a computer to take the square root of the argument, as square root, and by extension, root, are part of the name of the webcomic. This is presented as evidence for the purported conclusion. The author of the theory writes, "Ladies and gentlemen, you probably believe that Square Root of Minus Garfield started as a mashup project by the comic irregulars in November 2008. Nothing could be further from the truth. New disturbing evidence implies that by manipulating key events for more than 30 years, the comic irregulars' actions led to the creation of Garfield, setting up the stage for the webcomic you're reading now. Although these individuals waited with the patience of a glacier for decades, even they have limits and decided to slip a few hints of their nefarious plan along the way. As you can see, with the right panel selected and the right emphasis applied, this conspiracy becomes crystal clear." Comic strip switcheroo. Comic strip fans opened their papers on April 1st, 1997 and discovered their favorite strips looked a little different. Not only that, but in many cases characters popped up in other strips out of place. The reason for the chaos was a great comic switcheroony. 46 comic strip artists conspired to pen each other's strips for the day. For instance, Scott Adams of Dilbert took over Family Circus by Bill Kane, where he added his brand of corporate satire to the family theme strip by having the mother yell to her kid, "Work cuter, not harder." Garfield and his owner visited the world of Blondie, where Garfield promptly ate one of Dagwood's sandwiches, and the character Nancy popped up in the Foxtrot comic strip wearing a Darth Vader outfit. Garfield eats Odie in a commercial. This entry goes back to the previously mentioned eerie Garfield and Friends commercial, which aired in Latin America. In the commercial, John gets scared because the couch, the food and Odie are gone. Garfield supposedly ate them and John is next for Garfield's lunch as he shouts, "Garfield!" Lost Lasagna Cat episodes. As we already know, Lasagna Cat is a YouTube web series created by Zachary Johnson and Jeffrey Max. The footage for the second season of the series was actually shot pretty shortly after the first season, but the production of the episodes themselves went through development hell, and up to 22 episodes were shot, but only a total of 12 ended up being released. Although no exact details are known about the 10 alleged shelved episodes, the original trailer for season 2 contained some unidentified footage, possibly from one of the episodes. Starting at minute 105, in between John talking, there are 3 unidentified clips of Odie holding a trombone and wearing a costume, as explosions go off around him, eventually forcing him to cover his ears in the 3rd clip. It is currently unknown what song were the clips set to, or if the clips were even part of an unreleased episode at all, rather than just being made for the trailer. Odie isn't a dog. The only information I found supporting this theory is the Ask a Dog recurring joke. When these strips, Garfield reads a letter sent to Ask a Dog and Odie answers it. This could somewhat support the fact that the dog can't write, but yet again Garfield has been proven in the past to also be able to write. So yeah, aside from that, the only other piece of so-called evidence I found is on Reddit, in a thread on the subreddit r/fantheories titled Garfield Comic Strip Theory, Odie and the Joker share a common affliction. So yeah, moving on. Zombie Garfield merchandising. Zombie Garfield merchandising quite literally refers to official merchandise of a half-rotting Garfield with bones exposed with the phrase "nature's mistake" right beside him, which you can currently buy as of right now for $23. Jim Davis actually said in an interview that after creating the aforementioned Zombie Garfield merchandise, "I just didn't have a warm fuzzy feeling after doing it." Today I Watch You. Today I Watch You is an extremely bizarre and creepy square root of minus Garfield comic, where the first panel, Garfield simply states, "Today I watch you," followed by increasingly weird panels of Garfield in the same position, looking at you, the reader. 18 lives. This entry is so bizarre that there is next to no information whatsoever on the internet as a whole. Thankfully, on the Iceberg forum where this was posted, a curious user asked what the bizarre 18 lives entry referred to, and the creator of the Iceberg delivered the answer. Garfield has 9 more lives than God gave him at the end of Garfield his 9 lives. Garfield and Odie are gay in Garfield Labyrinth. This entry may seem equally nonsensical as the others, but is actually one which may actually be true. Garfield Labyrinth was a European action puzzle video game released for the Nintendo Game Boy in 1993. Now, the gay part of the entry comes in when Garfield most likely finishes the game, or each section. It displays a few rather odd cutscenes, which could be easily misinterpreted as Garfield and Odie being in a relationship. The first of these cutscenes is Garfield and Odie holding hands, looking at each other while a heart appears behind them, and the last one being Garfield hugging Odie with a big pink heart behind them while they're in a nice garden filled with flowers and butterflies. What are you doing here? This is another unused text file for the 2004 Garfield PlayStation 2 game, where in the PlayStation 2 version's executable is the following message: what are you doing here? Same as the previous unused text, it is unknown who would have said it or when. Catherine's Test. This is another unused text entry, this time coming from the 2006 Garfield and his 9 lives. From the name, you can already assume it's based off the book and or cartoon of the same name. The text at 1FAE40 shows off some test levels which would display as test level, Catherine's Test. Catherine would be Catherine Mataga, a programmer for this game. Garfield's Horrible Joy. Garfield's Horrible Joy seems to refer to some kind of horror creepypasta which goes like this. It starts off with the writer stating that he is an avid fan of the orange cat himself, Garfield, and that of all the Garfield TV shows, his favorite was a CGI animated The Garfield Show. The show is supposed to only have 4 seasons, but when he went to a garage sale and bought a copy of the whole series, it had an extra episode titled Garfield's Horrible Joy. This is how the author says the episode was like. It starts out with Garfield sitting on a chair and eating what looks like a dog's ear. I was a little confused but thought it was just a little bit of lasagna. Then when Normal came over and said hi and kept bragging about how he's the cutest cat in the world. This is when things got scary. Garfield then closes his eyes. For 2 seconds they stay closed. Then he opened his eyes, revealing 2 bloodshot eyes. Then Garfield grabbed Normal by the neck and threw him against the wall. Then he pulled out a butcher's knife that already had some blood on it, indicating that he already killed someone with it, and then slowly approached Normal. I was terrified at what I saw but had to see what happened. Then Normal opened his eyes, revealing to him Garfield with bloodshot eyes and a knife. Then Garfield stabbed Normal in the stomach, making blood splatter everywhere. Then came something that scarred me for life about eating meat. Garfield cut off Normal's head, then the Windows XP logo came and tried to put back Normal's head, and Garfield stabbed the Windows XP logo twice in the red part and blood splattered. Then Bill Gates came with the spinal cord glue and put Normal's head on. I threw up at the sight but had to see the end, regretting it. After that, Garfield went up the stairs and saw John working on his computer. Then John turns around and says, "Oh hey Garfield." Garfield then leaped up at John, stabbing his eye socket. Blood everywhere as he ran around the room until he just laid there dead. Then it showed a close-up of the front door. For 10 seconds nothing happened, then Garfield's face appeared. He had demonic sharp teeth and the huge bloodshot eyes, and the message repeatedly flashed on the screen saying, "I'm going to kill you, Sam, Sam, Sam." After all the commotion, the author smashes the disc and claims that he'll never see Garfield or any other cat again, and that watching that episode really some kind of demon. And meanwhile he was writing this, he can hear Garfield slamming on his door coming after him, knowing that before he dies he'll have to witness those bloodshot eyes. So yeah, your average Garfield creepypasta right there, ladies and gentlemen. Moving on. Gilbert Garfield. Gilbert Garfield is a bizarre analog horror alternate reality game, or ARG, created by Adult Swim alumnus Max Simonet, creator of Gemuseto. The series follows a fictionalized Max as he endeavors to preserve what, at first, appears to be a lost episode of Garfield and Friends, featuring the late comedian Gilbert Gottfried. However, as Max continues his investigation, he finds himself falling down a sinister rabbit hole surrounding the episode, its producers, and the enigmatic Gilbert Garfield himself. What may be classified as season 1 of the series lasted from May to December 2022, with season 2 beginning in January 2023. Hello Kitty and Sanrio Friends 3D Racing leftovers in Garfield cart. Once again another entry referring to unused or cut content, but this time it's a little bit more interesting than just unused text files. This time in the Garfield cart for Nintendo 3DS, there are a bunch of unused textures and graphics. First of all, we have A, fallback for when another texture is missing. This graphic can be seen on a rock in the 3D prototype on the track Pale Rock Lake. And we also have A, few leftover textures from Hello Kitty and Sanrio Friends 3D Racing can be found inside the folders /models/adventure, alongside their respective model files. Not only that, but there's also a logo and Autodesk 3ds Max model file from the main menu of Hello Kitty, which remains in /models/menu. The logo region is displayed on top screen while the large sphere is rotated for an animated background. johnanim_1.bmp, johnanim_2.bmp. Another entry about unused content starting to get a little tired now. This time it's from Garfield's Mad About Cats, an educational game that teaches about cats. Perhaps most notable as one of the late Lorenzo Music's final reprisals as Garfield, where we can find two unused graphics titled john_anim_1.bmp and john_anim_2.bmp respectively. As it can already be assumed, they were most likely animations for John which were cut out from the game for unknown reasons. Grey Odie. Grey Odie, as the creator of the Iceberg luckily answered for me in the comment section of this Iceberg, is an unused sprite of Odie from a week of Garfield which uses the wrong color palette, grey instead of yellow. 3 splitting timelines. I genuinely can't tell if this is a shitpost or not because of other franchises actually having splitting timelines, for example Sonic, Undertale, Zelda, but I couldn't believe Garfield of all series would have it. So when I started my research for evidence for this theory, I couldn't find anything except for the Garfield timeline is split into 3 sections. Hero timeline, Garfield listens to John and doesn't eat the lasagna, he's a good boy, he saves John from a home invasion in 1997. The Fallen Hero timeline, this is the current timeline, Garfield eats the lasagna, he eventually breeds a species of cats that star in a Broadway musical with the same name, and the Egg timeline. Garfield reverts back into an egg form and dreams of the events of Cloverfield franchise. And this is the first comment, so I conclude this theory just to be a shitpost. Garfield talks with God. Okay, this is one of my favorite entries by far. I'm gonna play a clip where Garfield talks with God, which is from the Garfield His 9 Lives TV special, and hopefully doesn't get me copyright striked. And for context, before this scene takes place, Garfield and Odie were literally blown up by a laser, and since that was Garfield's 9th life, he actually dies, and Odie's just a regular dog with 1 life, and with the context given, enjoy the clip. Immortality theory. Pretty sure this entry refers to what was explained in the previous one, where Garfield is essentially immortal since every time he ends up using his 9 lives, he just lies to God and gains back 9 of his lives. This is also assuming that God never counts exactly how many lives Garfield has left, so he can keep lying to God. Lab Animal Remake. This refers to the 2014 book remake of the classic 1984 Garfield His 9 Lives book. When this book, the only thing that separates it from the original is its absolutely insane illustrations, and specifically the illustrations for the Lab Animal chapter. And finally, the last entry of this iceberg. The garden in Garfield's 3rd life is Eden. This theory is actually pretty on point, but not completely. Yes, there are several parallels to the biblical gardens of Eden, for example the garden being described as surreal and Garfield quite literally eating marshmallows off flowers, and in the book quite literally being described as a takeoff of the Bible story of the Garden of Eden. And the plot of the episode reinforces this theory once again. Garfield and Chloe, who is Garfield's current owner, play in a garden built by her uncle Todd, who leaves them in charge of it in the condition that they never open a chest in the middle of the garden. Chloe and her kitten are heavily tempted to open it, but resist and go back to their eternal play, thinking that opening the box may hurt Uncle Todd. Once again, another direct parallel to Adam and Eve and the forbidden fruit. And this is the end of the complete Garfield iceberg. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, maybe consider subscribing. And with that said, I'll see you guys in the next iceberg. See ya!